What's good everyone, this is Micro here, and today I want to give you another advanced guide for Marvel Rivals. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite DPS characters in the game, and that is Squirrel. She's very much an unpredictable DPS character that brings a lot of utility to your team, but also brings a lot of CC against the enemies, so it protects you and your allies from incoming divers, brawlers, or just people who are getting too close within the front lines during the team fight. I play just as much hours as Squirrel as I do with Magneto, so I could definitely say I do know a lot about her kit and how to play her in a lot of the competitive matches, just as much as I spent a lot of time playing as Magneto. And I definitely want to say thank you guys for showing me a lot of love and the feedback from my advanced guide for Magneto. So I do hope for you Squirrel mains out there that if you want to learn some tips and tricks on how to get better with your gameplay as Squirrel in competitive matches, I hope that this guide would definitely shed some insight on how you can improve your gameplay so you can climb higher into the ranks in Marvel Rivals, especially for this season and future seasons to come. Now for today's video, I'll be talking about the following categories about Squirrel, diving into her in-depth skill application on how you can best use her abilities in certain situations and also in certain maps. Since I did not do a comprehensive guide on Squirrel before the game launch, I'll quickly go over the basic of what each of her skill does, along with the in-depth skill application for those skills too, just so that for the newcomers that might stumble upon this video, you can understand the basics on how you can play Squirrel and the advanced applications as well. I'll also be talking about best maps and challenges that you might face on certain maps when you do play Squirrel, depending on what game mode that you're playing too, along with some combos that you can use for her, both for long range and close range dueling, or even doing combos if you have a team up ability with Spider-Man, and also just your skill rotation so you can make sure that you can remain aggressive against the enemy team, but also can protect yourself and your allies in case of an enemy dive. I'll also be talking about some team synergies that best mesh well with Squirrel, not the team up abilities with Spider-Man, but like other characters too, that I've found to be very compatible with Squirrel during certain gameplay matches. And also my thoughts and recommendations for the quote-unquote meta compositions on how many tanks, DPS, and strategists I would suggest that your team should put together if you do want to play Squirrel in a match. And lastly, after everything, I'll give my personal thoughts and my personal rant on my experience with Squirrel in Season 0 of Marvel Rivals, and what I think how her gameplay would age in the future seasons to come. So without further ado, let's get started. Now the first thing I want to talk about today is her skill kit and the basics of what each of her skills does, since I didn't do a comprehensive guide yet. And also I want to talk about in-depth skill applications on how you can best use her skills during certain situations, duels, and also just basic team fight applications, that her skill set best be used. To start things off, we're just going to start with her basic fire. It's called Burst Acorn. It's a simple acorn that she just shoots out with their slingshot. It does AoE splash damage, kind of similar to like a grenade launcher. That's the best way I can describe her basic fire. You're basically chucking grenade launchers of acorns at the enemy team. It does good splash damage radius, which is one, forgiving, if you're not landing your direct shots, but it also could come into play if you're in the middle of team fights and if you hit one enemy who's next to another enemy, well, you're hitting multiple targets at once and you can definitely get some multiple picks at the same time. The splash field damage itself, if you do a direct hit, it does 110 damage. However, if you are trying to aim for people who is far away, you do see a significant damage fall off starting at 3 meters. Her damage is definitely noticeable if you are dueling against people who is up front and up close. However, if you're picking off people who are far away, they will take a lot less damage, but the blast radius is still significant enough for you to hit multiple targets at once. Next up, her next ability is the tail bounce. Basically, it's a simple ability that kind of gives her a high jump, very different from most of the other characters that allows them to double jump. And what's cool about it too is that you can jump first and still hit the tail bounce, and she can leap while in midair as well. So this is definitely really good if you're trying to traverse into higher terrain, or if you're in the middle of a team fight and you need to get away from a brawler. You can easily jump, hit tail bounce, and you'll be high enough that most of the other brawler characters really can't reach you at that point. So it kind of gives you a few seconds of reprieve to breathe, assess the situation, and figure out how you want to finish the fight from there. Her next ability is called Mammal Bond. This is one of those special abilities that is unique to her, where as soon as you press Mammal Bond, it basically allows you to use any of your other abilities free of charge without resetting the cooldown. That means that if you ended up using Tail Bounce and then your Tail Bounce is on a cooldown, you can hit Mammal Bond and then your Tail Bounce will be ready to go again, and then once you hit Tail Bounce again, your cooldown won't reset. So it can allow you to basically stack multiple skills at the same time depending on the situation. Another thing about Mammal Bond too is that it automatically reloads your burst acorns. So if you're in the middle of a team fight and you're just chucking acorns at the enemy team, creating a lot of splash damage and trying to burst them down, and if you see someone like trying to retreat but you realize that you're about to reload, you could just proc Mammal Bomb, it'll reload immediately for you, and then you can just keep chucking the burst acorns to see if you can pick off that last bit of a kill, or just keep adding that constant pressure to the enemy team. Her next skill is called Squirrel Blockade, where she chucks a giant acorn and it basically traps them for a couple seconds. The maximum charge time that you can wind up the Squirrel Blockade is 1.5 seconds. The thing about the charge time is the longer you charge it, it just signifies how fast and how far she'll throw it. So if you're fighting someone up close, you really don't need to charge the Squirrel Blockade. You could just press it and she'll basically lob the giant acorn instead of shooting it, and you can still, hit the enemy and, lock them in for however long too. The amount of time you do imprison the enemy though is 1.33 seconds, which is not bad. But if you stack it with the Mammal Bond ability, well then you can theoretically double the amount of time you imprison the enemy hero. So it goes from like 1 1/3 second to 2 2/3 of a second, which is almost as long as a Doctor Strange ult, which we all know how broken his ultimate ability can be. So it allows you to basically, do a falsetto Doctor Strange ult onto one enemy hero for about 2 2/3 of a second, and which gives you more than enough time to burst that enemy hero down to kill him, or cripple him enough to force him to retreat. It's one of my main bread and butter moves that I like to use on Squirrel Girl for pretty much any situation, and it's one of her defining skill set within her kit. Next, we're going to talk about her ultimate, and there's a lot of controversy around her ultimate. Most people say it's not the greatest. I have found many situations where it's one of the best uses of an ultimate for certain maps and also certain game modes, depending on how you use it. I'll go over that later. But it's called the Unbeatable Squirrel Tsunami. It's basically, she sends out a horde of squirrels in a linear direction. However, the squirrels have their own HP barred throughout the whole duration. It lasts for 10 seconds and they have 600 HP. But the thing about the Unbeatable Squirrel Tsunami that makes it unique is that when it bounces off any terrain, from a wall, Groot's wall, the payload, etc., it will then change direction based off of the angle that it bounced off the wall to. So it definitely makes this ult unique in the fact that it's very powerful and you can get a lot of value in close quarter matches. But it could also lose value if you accidentally send your Squirrel Tsunami off a cliff, because they can't recover back from that. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But the thing about it is that when you do catch some enemies within the tsunami, they take 150 damage. And the range and the width of the Squirrel Tsunami is actually, quite big and wide too. So it's fairly easy for you to kind of catch a lot of enemies within a straight line when you chuck it. So you can definitely have the potential to do a lot of damage during a team fight if everyone is crowded into a linear area, or if they're crowded into a small room. And if you can get the bounces off just right, you can really secure a lot of kills within a short time frame. which I have recorded a lot of gameplay on, both on competitive and quick play matches, on how I use the Squirrel Tsunami. And then lastly, we're going to talk about her team up ability. She gets a team up ability with Spider-Man, which she gets a move called Web Acorn. Basically, this is like a more glorified version of a grenade launcher, where instead of it focusing on doing a lot of damage, she basically chucks a webbed acorn at an area, and it does a really fairly good splash damage radius. But the thing about it, it does 80 damage to anyone caught within the radius with, no critical hit. The cooldown is 20 seconds, but it imprisons everyone within that radius for 1 second. So what makes this move unique is that during a team fight, if you see a lot of enemies grouped together, you can chuck the wave acorn, within that area, and any enemy caught in that radius will be locked down and CC'd for 1 second. So then that easily stops a lot of their abilities from proccing off. So that is definitely something to kind of keep in mind. And for her already having a lot of CC built into her kit, the web acorn is just as, that cherry on top move where you can just CC a lot of people at once. Even though the Mammal Bond does not allow you to use Web Acorn multiple times in a row, it's still a nice move to kind of like lock in multiple people, either at the start of a team fight or in the middle of a team fight to just, halt them for a brief second. So that's pretty much the basics of her skill set. Now, I'll quickly go over some advanced skill applications of what you can use depending on certain situations. And I'll start off with the Mammal Bond. As I mentioned before, her Mammal Bond allows her to kind of use any of her other skills free of charge without resetting the cooldown. So if you're, for instance, dueling against a brawler like Iron Fist, a Spider-Man, or even a Black Panther, if they're coming too close to you, you can start the duel by proccing off the Mammal Bond. When you have a for sure shot of using your Squirrel Blockade, you can chuck the Squirrel Blockade at them, lock them in for a couple of seconds. You can get a couple shots in, and then as soon as the CC kind of wears off, and if they are starting to retreat or if they're starting to come to you, you can then chuck the Squirrel Blockade again, and then that should give you enough time to secure the kill. I use this all the time during my gameplay with Squirrel Girl because I place Squirrel Girl in the middle of my team's formation so that she's not too far into the front lines with the tanks. She's not all the way in the back with the supports, she's just directly in the middle, so it allows me to protect my supports. If there's a lot of brawlers that's trying to dive in and trying to take out my supports, I can easily protect my supports that way by CCing the diving heroes, especially the Iron Fist, because they are notorious in this season. I can easily protect my support heroes quite a bit by stun locking him and just bursting him down relatively easy. Or if I notice that if my tanks are having a little bit of trouble in the front lines and they're starting to back up, then I can easily CC any aggressive heroes that's trying to take out my tanks, so that it gives them time to retreat, or it gives my support time to heal them back up, and then I can just take over for a couple seconds, poke at the enemy front line to relieve some pressure. So that's how I use the Mammal Bond. Now when it comes to advanced application for Unbeatable Squirrel Tsunami, I'm going to do a whole nother section on that because there's so much unpredictable value that can come from her ultimate that can either make or break a team fight. And that is simply because of how the Squirrel Tsunami can bounce around different terrain. I'll summarize it in this section, but I'll do a whole nother video on just her ult in general. Since her Squirrel Tsunami can bounce off terrain, it is often best used in close quarter maps, such as like control maps, where people are forced into like a confined area that has a lot of objects and walls and terrains around, so that when you use your Squirrel Tsunami, it can bounce off the walls very easily. Or if you notice that you see multiple enemies within like a confined area, you can use your Squirrel Tsunami inside that house because it has like a lot of terrain and the pillars and things like that, so it's very easy for the squirrels to bounce off walls and hit the enemy teams multiple times, and there's no fall off cliff, so you don't have to worry about your squirrels falling off a ledge. There has been multiple times where I would use my ultimate within that small area, and I almost got a team wipe just by using my ult inside that small confined area. The worst times to use your ultimate, as I always keep mentioning, is within an area that has a large cliff for your squirrels to fall off to. And there are some maps that has, chokehold points, or even the checkpoints themselves that has like a large, huge cliff. Like for instance, the Galactic Wakanda map, that control map where you're fighting inside that waterfall. That's a big open space for your squirrels could just fall off a cliff if you were to use an ultimate there. So that would be one example of where you would not use your ultimate, because you won't get much value there. So you would have to resort to using her skills or her basic fire in that instance. But that's pretty much the gist of how you should use her skills in a more in-depth situation, depending on which map you're using her in, and also depending on how the team fight is unfolding. The next part that I want to talk about is her best map that you can use Squirrel Girl in, and some of the maps that I find often challenging to play as Squirrel Girl because of either terrain or just the layout of the map itself. Now, because of her skill set and her abilities, there's actually quite a lot of maps that she can fairly excel in, and that would be any maps that, one, has a lot of objects around, or doesn't have that much ledges or fall offs, cliffs next to a checkpoint or a chokehold point, or two, any maps that you would have to escort a payload or defend the payload against the enemy team, because the enemy team would have to traverse in somewhat of a linear line, which then gives Squirrel Girl some opportunity, depending on what part of the map you're on, to use her ultimate to really pick off some enemies who are unaware of where you're at, or B, is clumped together with other people, and it makes it easier for you to remain in the middle of your team formation to protect your tanks and your allies from any other enemy heroes who are coming in too close, dive heroes or assassins who's trying to take out your supports during the payload matches, because it's easier to assess where everyone is at, because everyone needs to push. So if you're defending a payload map, you don't need to worry about any campers or snipers who is staying in one spot throughout the whole match. They have to constantly move, which then allows you to scope out where they're at, and you can poke them from afar using your burst acorns. Now on the flip side, the maps that she does tend to struggle with are the open-ended maps. Now it's not the open-ended maps that has like a wide area that has some walls and terrains around it. For instance, the Clintar map that has that giant circle when you're trying to walk into the first checkpoint, or even the checkpoint itself. It's the open-ended maps that has a lot of cliffs or fall-off ledges around the checkpoint or around a chokehold point. For instance, in the Galactic Wakanda, when you're fighting and trying to take control of the waterfall checkpoint, there's that huge area that's just nothing but cliffs and fall-offs. And that's a disadvantage for Squirrel Girl, because you can't get much value from your ultimate, unlike some other heroes in that area. Therefore, you're forced to resort to only use your abilities and your basic fire within that area. The only time you can best use your Squirrel Blockade is if you manage to take control of the checkpoint and your team is trying to corner off the enemy team in that small little tunnel area. That would be a good opportunity for you to use your ultimate. But other than that, in the beginning of the match, or if your guys are losing, there's really not much value you can get from using her ultimate. So that's definitely a disadvantage for Squirrel Girl. Another map that would be disadvantageous for Squirrel Girl would be the Hydra base, because all three of the maps within the Hydra bases all has the checkpoints that has some form of a fairly large cliff area that your squirrels can easily fall off. So definitely those type of maps that has a huge disadvantage on are those open-ended maps that has the ledges and the cliffs. The next part I want to talk about is her combos and her rotations. For Squirrel Girl, her combos is very straightforward. However, it is supremely flexible. on how you want to use your combos and your rotations for her. Simply because she kind of does one type of job, but she does it really, really well, which is CC locking the enemy heroes. From her squirrel blockade to the web acorn and her mammal bond to kind of reset her squirrel blockade, she's really a one-trick pony that does the job really well, especially for a DPS hero. With that being said, my recommended combo, which is my bread and butter for Squirrel Girl, is if you're dueling against a brawler or a dive hero who's relatively close by you, you can start the combo by using Squirrel Blockade, fire off a couple shots of your Burst Acorn. Soon as the CC wears off, proc your Mammal Bond, use Squirrel Blockade again, and then finish them off with the Burst Acorn to get the job done. Another combo you can do, especially when you're within a team fight and there's a lot of enemies grouped together, what I like to do is I like to start the combo off with a tail bounce to get myself positioned into the air, which gives me a good angle to proc the web acorn if I have a team up ability with Spider-Man. Then I use the burst acorn for a couple of shots while everyone's kind of CC'd down, and then anyone who is low on health, or if there are any support characters that I managed to catch, then I follow up by using Squirrel Blockade to lock them in and then finish them off with the Burst Acorn. And that is situational but highly effective. Now the third combo that I personally do, that I've gotten personal value on, is when I use my ultimates on most maps, I like to combo it off by doing Tail Bounce followed by the Squirrel Tsunami. Because what most people sometimes talk about is they just use Squirrel Tsunami on the ground just to pick off any heroes that are in front of them. However, what I do, and this is my personal hot take on this, I don't use her ultimate to pick off kills of the person in front of me. I use it to scout for other threats of enemy heroes behind the person that I'm seeing. So that's why I use the tail bounce, and then I position my Squirrel Tsunami to go after the people behind the person I'm going to duel that's in front of me, so that while I'm dueling the person in front of me, the Squirrel Tsunami is going to scout and damage the people behind the enemy hero, so that makes it harder for him to get back up, or I could get lucky enough to get kills of the people behind him, so that all I gotta worry about is the person in front of me, which then I have my own CC moves to lock down the person in front of me during the duel, burst him down, and pick up a kill that way. That's how I use my ultimate, and that's my bread and butter on how I position my ultimate. That's why if you see my gameplays and I do my ultimates, you often see me use a tail bounce first and then I proc my ultimate that way, because it gives me a better angle and a better insight on who's behind the enemy hero, and then I just position my ultimate to go after them. And often than not, I do catch a lot of people off guard when I do that. So those are like the three main combos that I mainly do for Squirrel Girl.
I am ready to put on a show! Ooh, a touch of healing. Friends, gather around!
Forces incoming. Bring on!
Against the world! I appreciate you.
You're quite welcome.
No! What are you waiting for? Do it!
Shade that tree!
Just do it!
Born again!
I beg your pardon?
appreciate you. Take that, you villain!
Next up, I want to talk about the team synergies and the meta comps for Squirrel Girl that I've found success in during my competitive rank matches. Now, I'm not talking about like the team up abilities with Spider-Man. I'm talking about like other characters that I've found great usage for when I place as Squirrel Girl. And the first type of team synergy that I'll talk about, it also correlates to one of my recommended meta team compositions, would be a 1, 3, and a 2, which represents 1 Vanguard, 3 DPS, and 2 strategists. And why I think that's a good team synergy for Squirrel Girl is because if your teammates doesn't have a Spider-Man and they're playing other DPS heroes, whether it be a Moon Knight, a Punisher, a Black Panther, or a Magic, those heroes could just focus on, being on the front lines with the tanks, doing as much damage, and just wreaking chaos. And then when I play as Squirrel Girl, I play as that third DPS role that hangs more in the back. Still in the middle of the team formation, but I kind of hang closer to the back line with the supports because I play as offense support in case there are any brawlers like Iron Fists, Black Panthers, Wolverines, or Thors that's trying to take out my supports. So then I act as a protector for my support characters so that if there are people who are trying to flank us in the back line, I could CC lock them and protect my supports if they're going after them, or if they're going after me, well then I have healers who can keep me alive while I'm dueling against the oncoming brawler heroes that might try to take us out during a team fight. And that's one of my recommendations for a meta comp when you are playing as Squirrel Girl is a 1, 3, and a 2. And the 1 tank hero, well, his main job is just soaking up as much damage for the other 2 DPS heroes that are in the front line with him, and he's getting the help of the 2 DPS heroes because he's not trying to deal as much damage because he has 2 other DPS heroes with him adding the pressure on his behalf. Another team synergy that I could recommend and think about that I've seen some success with is that if you are playing with a balanced composition like a 2-2-2 formation, then the other team synergy that Squirrel Girl fares well with is if you are playing with another DPS hero that is great of dealing with aerial heroes such as Iron Man, Storm, or even Scarlet Witch sometimes when she's flowing up in the air. That's because Squirrel Girl, even though she's really great on dealing damage towards enemy heroes who are on the ground, it takes a little bit of practice, and she's not the greatest of dealing with heroes who are airborne. Simply because, one, her acorns are projectile based, so you have to lead with your shots, and most of the time that if you're trying to target against an airborne enemy, well, the AoE splash damage is only going to hit them. You're not dealing multiple splash damage against multiple heroes on the ground. Therefore, she doesn't get as much value, and on top of that, her Squirrel Tsunami can't fly, so there's no way that you can proc an ultimate to take down an aerial hero. That's why if I'm playing with a teammate who is good at dealing with airborne heroes, such as like a Punisher or a Namor, or even a sniper teammate like Hawkeye or Black Widow, then it gives me the relief that I can just trust them on dealing with the airborne heroes, and then I'll take care of the people who are on the ground and add pressure that way. So in summary, she does really well with the perfect balanced composition of a 2-2-2, or she can be the flex DPS hero that hangs in the bat as offense support for your support characters, or protecting the vanguards that are retreating during a 1-3-2 split. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is just my personal thoughts and my opinions on Squirrel Girl herself. I love her kit and I love her playstyle. Now, I'm not going to say what character she kind of resembles in Overwatch, because after playing her extensively during my quick play and competitive matches, There are some kits that she's fairly similar to that particular person in Overwatch, but she is more focused on CC locking the enemy heroes, which is what that person cannot do in Overwatch. Therefore, I will not make that comparison at all. So that's a good thing. Another thing for Squirrel Girl is I honestly think that she is a underrated, slept hero. There's been many tier lists that people have made online on YouTube and whatnot, and they kind of put her like somewhere in the middle, kind of like, you know, B tier, some C tiers, and things like that. However, I think because of her skill set and her skill kit, I think she's just one of those heroes that's way too unpredictable for a professional player to kind of like hone down and really kind of dictate how good she is. But because she provides such great utility for your teammates, CC stunning, you know, the enemy heroes for a great duration, I think she's just a really slept on character that I believe that the more time you invest in playing with her and the better you get with her, her value drastically increases, not only for yourself but for your team as well. However, I think one of my personal opinion as to why she kind of stands relatively low on the tier list is simply because of her unpredictable value that she can bring to the table. It's not fairly consistent, and that's something I can admit. You know, there's been a lot of matches where I end up getting MVP just because I'm just able to angle all my shots the right way, and you know, the enemy heroes are just grouped up together relatively nicely within a linear area, or I'm hitting all the right terrains when I'm casting my ultimate, and I can just see so much damage and value out of that match, and I just get MVP that way. Whereas there's just some matches where I just ended up struggling for one reason or another, whether it's because I'm just facing a really good team that just knows how to take out my tanks very well, which then kind of makes it hard for me to stay alive because my tanks are constantly dying, and then they are able to push hard against me and then my teammates. Or I'm facing a team full of brawlers, which again, I can do well against, you know, a couple of brawlers, but if I'm facing a Venom, an Iron Fist, a Spider-Man, and a Black Panther at the same time, like, that's just way too many brawlers for me to protect my support characters on. And if I'm constantly getting dove with multiple different brawlers, well, then that puts a struggle on me too. And there's been matches like that where I just flat out just lose because we're just dealing with nothing but brawlers. So honestly, I think that Squirrel Girl is just one of those characters where, because she brings so much unpredictable chaos into a team fight, the more that you understand how you can bounce her basic fire around corners to keep yourself safe while damaging enemy heroes, or the more that you get used to, you know, bouncing your ultimate around walls, objects, corners, around the payloads to hit the enemy heroes multiple different times, you're going to get better value within your own gameplay. But that just takes time. That takes time to understand which parts of the map is best on using the ultimates. And like I said, I'll make a whole separate video for just Squirrel Girl talking about her angling of her ultimates, because the value on when you cast your ultimate and where you cast your ultimate definitely determines whether or not you win a team fight or you lose a team fight, and especially whether or not you win the match or you lose the match because of how you position your ultimate. But that just keeps adding on to the fact that she just brings so much unpredictable value, which is probably why many people put her down on the tier list so much, because it's just too much of a variable to determine her being a high ranking, easy to play hero. Now, Marvel Rivals put her difficulty as, you know, 1-star, which again, that would make sense because her skill set is so simple to understand. However, on a pro level play, my personal intake on her intellectual difficulty is a 5-star, bar none. Because to master the trajectory of her acorns, her basic fire to create lob shots to hit enemies up close, or skip shots if you just want to focus on just splash damage, or high lob shots if you're aiming at people who are far away, that takes time to master. Plus, on top of that, if you position Squirrel Girl in the middle of your team formation, whether you're on the ground or you're on the high ground, still position yourself in the middle and to be on the lookout of protecting your tanks if they were retreating backwards and spamming chokehold points on their behalf, or protecting your supports if they're getting dove a lot by brawler heroes. That is something that you need to always be aware of and keep in mind when you're playing competitive matches. So even though you're a role of a DPS hero, you're also taking on the role of a scout, which is not a role in Marvel Rivals, but that's kind of how I view it. You're keeping on the lookout for both sides of your team. People on front, people in the back. Because she has the skill set to stun lock anybody who's coming too close and protecting your allies. But that wraps up for this advanced guide video. If you enjoyed and liked what you've heard and listened to, don't forget to leave a like and also leave a comment, because as I mentioned, I do take the comments very seriously. I love the feedback that you guys are giving me on the value you're getting from these advanced guides. I hope it does help you climb higher in the ranks, and I will be doing updated advanced guides as new seasons roll around the corner, because as new seasons roll around, we also get new characters and also new maps, which then would allow me to update my advanced guides for these characters each and every seasons to make sure that we can assess how we can best deal with the new maps and the new patch updates and the new heroes we would get in the future. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys later.